Thanks for joining us once again on Research Fantasy Presents the NBA Daily Fantasy Baller Value Edition. Last night was a pretty good night. I mean, we had Jeremy Lin, who really looked as bad as it could possibly be, shooting 1 for 9 in the first half, accumulating basically no fantasy production. But hey, at least he didn't end up like Tyler Johnson, who was the bigger disappointment of the night. We also had Courtney Lee, who the same thing I said about Lin could be said about Lee. He came back. He didn't quite get to that value marker, but he was also one who wouldn't kill you based on his performance. Ivica Zubac, he was a guy that I was all in on, literally all in on. I had him in 100% of my lineups, and I would love to tell you that it worked out better than it did because he was only owned at 11%, which I was admittedly a little bit shocked of. On DraftKings, he was about 8% owned. On FanDuel in the tournaments I was in. It's going to be interesting to see down the stretch how things work in Los Angeles. I cannot imagine that it's good for Luke Walton's long-term potential there to not listen to what Magic Johnson says. You have to remember, whatever sport you're in, when new management comes in, if you're not their guy, they don't have a loyalty to you. There are no allegiances to people who the coach or the management doesn't bring in. So if Magic Johnson's saying, because we have to draft people because I don't know if you noticed, Luke, we're an absolutely horrible basketball team. We need to see what we have in Zubac because we need to figure out, are we going to have to go into the draft and be looking for a forward or another big man who could, play the role that we think he could play, so give him minutes. Well, Zubac played 31 minutes for the D-League team Saturday night. He came back with 19 minutes last night. Who knows what he's going to get tonight. Even though he didn't make my 3 plays tonight, he is someone I'm going to have a lot of ownership of because one of these nights they're going to give him 25 or 30 minutes, and you saw in 19 minutes he returned about 25 fantasy points. That's nothing to scoff at. Like I said, the point per minute production is going to be elite for him up to about the 30-point mark, and then there's going to be some leveling off. So let's take a look at who our model really likes in the value tier tonight. Our model really likes Jordan Clarkson, Jonas Valanciunas, Brandon Wright. I think he's got a little bit of punt play potential if he gets some minutes. And he's a guy in the past who, if he can get 22 minutes, he, just like Zubac, can get you 25 fantasy points. Manu Ginobili, Patty Mills. Oh, he made our list. I kind of screwed that up already. Nemanja Bjelica, Greg Monroe, Jeremy Lamb, Kyle Anderson. So I already mentioned Patty Mills. We know that Tony Parker's out. We know that DeJounte Murray is out. I think that as long as this game stays close, that Mills should see more towards that 30-point mark. He had 31 fantasy points in 21 minutes. When he is actually one of the focuses of the offense, he's going to produce. We already know how bad Dennis Schroeder is when it comes to defending opposing point guards. So as long as this stays competitive, and I'm kind of saying that like I'm locked in on Mills if Kawhi Leonard plays, little skeptical if Kawhi Leonard doesn't, because he could see 21 minutes, and if his shot isn't falling, that 30 fantasy points could very quickly become 12, and you're left holding the bags. 8,700 fantasy draft, 4,000 FanDuel, 4,400 on DraftKings. You can do a lot worse if you want to round out a lineup, but he's someone I'm going to have some ownership of tonight. Next up, I'm going to go with Cauley-Stein of the Sacramento Kings playing up against the Orlando Magic tonight. I don't have any respect for the Orlando Magic. I think they're an absolutely horrible basketball team. He's coming in priced at 9,800 on Fantasy Draft, 5,500 on FanDuel, 5,000 on DraftKings. We know all about the type of defender Nikola Vucevic is. He's the type of defender who's willing to say that he is a bad defender. So anytime someone says they're bad at doing something, you're going to take their word for it. His price is a little bit too low for me. I think there's still a pretty nice ceiling. The minutes are going to be there, which is something that is always beneficial, because even though he hasn't been consistent with his production while getting those high minutes, it's going to level off eventually. So I'm expecting about 30 fantasy points out of him tonight. Could be more, but I think 30 fantasy points for that price does well. Next up, let's roll with his teammate, who's possibly my favorite tournament play in the value tier tonight, and that's Buddy Hield of the Sacramento Kings. 7,800 on Fantasy Draft, 4,200 FanDuel, 4K DraftKings. Buddy's starting to get a start in Sacramento. They've determined Langston Galloway's not the way they want to go. It appears Tyreek going to be heavily limited for the rest of the season, not really seeing over that 25-minute mark. Ben McLemore is what he is. Hell, even Darren Collison is what he is. So, against an Orlando Magic team that's both offensively bad and defensively bad at this price, needing about 20 fantasy points to hit value, a guy who makes his money on threes, if he's able to hit those 3-point shots tonight and he puts up the production that we've seen out of him in the last 2 games that he's played and seen additional run, we were looking at 26.75, 29.5 in terms of production. Certainly something we should see tonight, making Buddy Hield one of my favorite options in the value tier this evening. All right, that wraps it up for our podcast tonight. Make sure to subscribe to this if you like our videos. Tell your friends who play. Maybe keep it a secret. I don't want you to, but if you think that you have an advantage over your friends, I get it. Money's money. Make sure to head over to researchfantasy.com, sign up for our NBA mailing list, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter @ResearchAndWin, and join us again tomorrow.